BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, I'm Brian Cox.
And I'm Robin Ince. This is the Infinite Monkey Cage. And today, I suppose, we should start with one of the great quotes of physics. Time is an illusion. And, of course, that was said by Ken Dodd when he was playing the Bradford Alhambra back in 1972. It was just before dawn. It was the beginning of the third act, and all the Diddy men came out dressed as Einstein and started singing Tears. It was a beautiful moment where physics and variety met.
Right, for our many listeners outside the UK and or the 1970s, Robin's introduction will need some additional cultural context, so much in fact that we need more time than we have. And in any case, to be complete, we'd have to know what time is, which is, coincidentally, the subject of today's Monkey Cage.
But of course, I know what it is, because there's the great famous quotation from physics, which is time's an illusion, which was first said by Ken Dodd at the Bradford Alhambra. It was just turning towards dawn as the Diddy men came on for the beginning of the third act, singing Tears, dressed as Albert Einstein, and I think also Paul Dirac. I'm so sorry, I seem to have got caught in a certain part of the block universe.
So,
I think that's explained everything. I feel the Ken Dodd illusion means that we don't require doing the rest of the show, so now we'll just play some music until 9:30am.
It's the idea of the Diddy men dressed as Paul Dirac.
I know, it's a beautiful image, isn't it? Dirac Diddy men. Here come the Diraci men. The Diraci men. This is, I'll tell you what, for those of you who don't normally listen when we're on later on in the afternoon, hearing this in the morning, it's very different to Melvin Bragg, isn't it?
Today, to discuss our current understanding of time, we're joined by two physicists and a writer with a penchant for manipulating time. And they are...
Hello, I'm Carlo Rovelli. I am a theoretical physicist. I work on quantum gravity. And the most disconcerting thing I find about time is that there is no global present, which means that if I ask what is happening here now, I know, I'm just talking, but if I ask what is happening now in a distant galaxy, the correct answer to the question is that the question makes no sense.
Hi, I'm Dowker. I'm a professor of theoretical physics at Imperial College in London, and the most frustrating and disconcerting thing about time that I find is my inability to convince my colleagues that time is not an illusion, that it is physically real and not just a figment of our imaginations.
Hello, I'm Mark Gatiss. I'm an actor and writer, and the most frustrating, disconcerting thing about time is that I am still unable to control it despite many attempts.
And this is our panel.
Carlo, before we start, time is, I suppose, something that everybody thinks they know about. It's a very visceral subject, isn't it? We all age. Time is central to our lives. So, why is there a problem in understanding what time is?
I think to some extent it's precisely because it's so visual and so emotionally significant to us. We cannot just talk about time in a detached way, because we live in time, and time also brings us everything and takes away everything from us. So it's a source of our, the impermanence of the world, and so every time we talk about time, we are touched inside ourselves. And time is a very complicated thing. There is an experiential, emotional experience of time, which of course is not in physics, depend on our brain, our own way of thinking. It's made by memories, expectation, and it's hard to separate that from the actual physics of clocks and the physics of passing time and the difference between the past and the future and all those kind of things. So it's a complexity of time, I think, that makes it an interesting subject, but also a subject that touches us.
But it would seem, Faye, that even as Carlo says, we have such a personal experience of it that it's perhaps hard to detach ourselves from it and study it dispassionately. It would seem, surely, that we can agree that it exists. But as you said, you have a problem convincing your physics colleagues that there is such a thing as time. So could you say why there's a problem there?
It's an extraordinary situation, and A colleague of Carlo's and mine called Tim Maudlin, who's a philosopher of physics, says that he's amazed that he can go around putting food on the table by giving talks about the reality of time. But the situation has arisen largely because our current best scientific understanding of time is general relativity, or within general relativity. That's Einstein's theory of gravity. And Carlo, in his introduction, touched on a very important thing that general relativity has taught us, which is that there's no global now. There's no global present moment, only a local present moment. And that makes it very difficult to situate anything like a passage of time within the theory. In fact, people have basically given up. So the picture of the universe that most scientists have within general relativity is what is often referred to as the block universe. And that's a picture in which all events, past, present, if they exist, and future events, they all have the same status. They're just as real as each other. So if one believes that past events have happened and are real, then future events are just as real. Or, if to use tense language, you could say that the future has already happened. And in this block, all of these events are laid out once and for all in a timeless way, and there's nothing in the theory to coordinate with that deep fundamental aspect of our experience, which is its temporality, the fact that we have experiences in time. We experience one thing after another.
So, Mark, how do you react when you hear those things? Like when we hear about different ideas of the possible kind of fictional nature of time, when we hear about the block universe. So we're 5 minutes into recording this show, and yet the end of this show exists already. It's just, we haven't experienced, but it's there, and it feels like that seems so counter-instinctual to kind of say there is your reality is some kind of falsehood, though we can never actually jump away from it, or can we ever escape from that reality?
You know what's very strange is that in such an intense scientific discussion, it sounds a lot like destiny, doesn't it? If you have a block pavement stretching out in front of you, which is absolutely impossible to change, that sounds like something that the ancient Greeks would nod their heads sagely about, say, well, don't you see? I mean, it's such a fascinating idea, and we've all, as Carlo says, we're all so caught up in our own version of it, our own. We know that our tea gets cold, we know that our hair falls out, we know that people die, things die, everything grows old. And yet, intellectually, the idea that you can sort of project yourself forward and think, well, that's happening now. That Henry VIII is currently divorcing Catherine of Aragon, whilst Donald Trump is losing his second election, say, and all these things are rolling along at the same time is just extraordinary. May I ask though, is that quite the same as a multiverse? Does that mean that literally everything possible is happening at once, or there is a certain yellow brick road which is just the way it's going to be?
Can I also just mention, by the way, for those of some of the audience can actually see Brian, when you said we all know our hair falls out, Brian gave a very superior look, by the way. But yeah, the multiverse idea. I mean, in fact, I don't even think we should go into the multiverse, because the idea of getting two physicists.
We already have.
No, it's a very different story than the multi-universe. The multi-universe is it's a speculation of some people that some people may like, some don't like. It hasn't been in any sense proven a useful way of thinking about the universe yet. Here we're talking about general relativity. So here we're talking about a theory which is 100 years old, which have given an incredible amount of predictions, all confirmed, which we use for the GPS in our car. So it's totally solid science, general relativity, which tell us that temporality works different than our intuition. And I think that's the main message. And it does so in a variety of ways. For instance, it tells us that it's perfectly possible to go for a trip, come back, and when we're back, find our children who are much older than us. And this is just shocking. There are movies about that. But it's true. And so we have, in a sense, to reorganize our way of thinking time to allow for these true facts of the world to be possible, to be real, to be actual. We believe that they are. Nobody questions that in physics. So I think that the core of the story here is that time is different than the way we think about it usually. There's no doubt about that. We can, go for a trip and come back and find our children older than us. So therefore, time is different than the way we think. Time is not an illusion. It's not at the fundamental level the way we think it is.
Faye, this is if you asked most people, as in non-physicists, non-scientists, you ask them what time is, they would probably think they knew exactly what it was. Time is the thing in which things happen. That's it. So when does it become? At what point of understanding? At what point? What issues come in where you start to go? Well, actually, time just as that is not enough anymore. It's not enough just to see it as this continuum.
I think this local aspect of time, the experiential aspect, which has been referred to, it's telling us something fundamental about future physics, because, as I said, it's not captured within general relativity. There's no place for it in general relativity. The most natural picture of the world in general relativity, which is currently our best theory and super successful and hasn't been superseded yet. But I think that our experience is telling us something about future physics, about a theory that's better than general relativity, something that will explain general relativity, something that underlies it. And I think that our experience is a clue. It's telling us a direction to go in doing future research, which is quite amazing because it's something that everyone has direct access to. And yet it's subjective. That word has already been used. People have already brought that up. And that's the key to why it's so difficult to discuss, because the question is, do we take that subjective experience as data that needs to find a scientific explanation? And some people just say, no, it doesn't, because it's subjective. But I take it seriously as empirical evidence of something. That what that thing is, we don't know.
Mark, it's a remarkable idea, isn't it? That thing that we sort of almost hold most dear, right? The passing of time, the fact that we were children and we will be old and one day we will die, is somehow not part of the fundamental description of reality, perhaps, which is certainly Carlo's view.
I agree with Robin. This is complicated. I mean, it's a fascinating sort of grey area where science really does become like philosophy, doesn't it? Or I can imagine this discussion being had in 15th century Florence, in a way, in the sense that it's like, well, what are we? What on earth are we? Well, it's the wilder realms of sort of speculation, isn't it? If what we believe to be the absolute fundamentals of existence, we're born, we grow old, we die, we fall in love, we eat, we drink, we do things, are actually just an entirely a kind of construct, then we are absolutely, joining science with art in a way, aren't we? We're asking the most fundamental question about ourselves. I think that's intriguing.
But isn't this science what science has done in the best so many times? I mean, with the Copernican revolution, with Darwin in antiquity when figured out that the Earth was round. I mean, we are burned thinking that there's up and down, and then we discover that it's a local thing. We grow up thinking that the sun goes around us, and then we discover that that's not contradicted by science, but it's just our perspective. And so on. These are not illusory things. They're real things, but they're complicated. They're not fundamental.
But if for instance, the Darwinian revolution changed an awful lot of people's perspective up until the present day on where we came from, but that doesn't alter the fundamentals of how we live our lives. Well, if we believe that time is real and we are going to grow old and die, if we accept the concept that it's actually not, then what do we do on a day-to-day basis? What does that change apart from the fact that we can sit and scratch our chins and go, oh, well, good. Nothing really. It's not the same as actually discovering a fundamental truth about the universe, that the Earth orbits the sun. That's a real discovery. This is like a sort of philosophical point, isn't it?
Careful, you're going to lose them all their grants if you're not. Oh, we just found out you've been doing philosophy. That's no grants for you.
I want to throw that to Faye. I'd like to throw that question to Faye. Is it just mere? Does it matter? I mean, Mark is trying to suggest that there's something that's just purely, optional here. We don't need to consider the problem.
One of the joys of working on quantum gravity is that you grapple with questions, ancient questions. So you mentioned Renaissance Florence or something. I mean, this question has been debated ever since we have records of there being debates about the nature of the world. So Parmenides was on the what I would call block universe side of the debate, believing that that the universe just is. So that these things they're really, really ancient. But it's not just philosophy. We don't understand a lot of things about general relativity because we don't understand how it really interacts with quantum matter. So matter curves space-time. But we know matter is actually quantum mechanical, and we don't know how quantum mechanical matter curves space and time. So we want to make progress in understanding space-time, in understanding gravity better, understanding black holes better, understanding the final fate of a black hole better. And to do that, we need to make progress in fundamental physics that will be tested. It will be empirical. It will have consequences that we can go out and test. But how do you do that? What guides you in pursuing a particular direction of research in this area? And these sorts of things are guiding one to do research. So it's really important that we have a diversity of perspectives on our current theories in order to have the best chance of making progress.
The grant is safe.
But I see what Mark means, because there is something about whether it is about us going around the sun, whether it is about our connection to all other living creatures through natural selection. There's a kind of picture theory of language. You can see the picture of it. And yet there is something strange, however practical and useful, and all of those different things that these ideas are, and however wonderful they are, somehow you are not then, you can't, can you build on that for your reality, for your personal reality? I'm not talking about for the importance of scientific research. That bit where you go, however much you understand time, does your relationship, you are not then able to go, well, now that I've found out time is an illusion, this is the way that I'm going to be able to catch that bus that I missed, or whatever else it might be. Do you see? I don't know if that's, I know it's a long way.
People who believe in the block universe will have to speak for themselves. But for me,
they've already spoken. They've already spoken.
So I believe the past is real, but the future is not. That it's open. It hasn't happened yet. And
see, that's the hardest bit, I think.
That does affect my day-to-day feelings. I mean, the past is real. For example, the past is real. The events of the past are fixed and real. They influence me. That has some, it has both. I find consolation in it. In terms of people that I've lost, but I also find it's also hard because things that you did that you regret, they're real and concrete and cannot be erased. They're physically real too. So these ideas, for me, they're not just abstract. They do impinge on me at an emotional level.
Carlo, this discussion raises some very, I think, simple and direct questions. One is, we remember the past. We don't remember the future. So what possible explanation can there be in a timeless theory for the difference between the past and the future?
This is what you're referring to, the difference between the past and the future. In fact, it's a problem that originated in physics even before general relativity, because in modern science, since Newton and with Maxwell and Faraday and general relativity, special relativity, quantum mechanics, quantum field theory, it came as a surprise, of course, that the fundamental laws of physics seems to be symmetric if you change t minus t. So there is a question of how come that our experience is so dramatically non-symmetric. In past and future. But of course there is a law of physics which make the distinction because of the second law of thermodynamics, because the heat goes from hot to cold things. Now, the second law of thermodynamics, this thing we understand very well. We understand why if you have a cold and a hot thing, heat goes from the cold to the hot and not vice versa. And in a sense...
Just to be very clear, so you're for example, saying that ice melts.
Yeah.
So that gives us a direction.
Ice melt gives us a direction of time, which means that if you start in one direction of time, which we call the past, from ice and water, and you leave them there in a hot day, you know for sure that ice will melt. So this we understand. We understand that if there is this initial dissymmetry due to the fact that you start with ice and water, physicists say low entropy, then the ice will melt. So physicists will say entropy goes up. Now, once we have understood that, is that sufficient for giving us an understanding, accounting for the fact that we feel the past is fixed and the future open? I think this is a beautiful scientific question. I think it is sufficient, and in fact I've worked on that, and I think that one can argue in general that in a world where the entropy goes up, so in a world where the second law of thermodynamics holds, where the entropy was was low in the past, automatically there are a lot of traces of the past that exist, but not traces of the future. So the thermodynamic dissymmetry has a consequence that today, there are steps in the sand that are correlated to somebody walking. There are craters on the moon which are correlated to rocks, meteorite falling in the past. But there are not similar things about the future. In our brain, there are plenty of memories of the past, but not anticipation of the future. And this existence of traces of the past, it's a reason, it accounts for our sense that the past is fixed and the future is opening. Not because it's illusionary. So what we mean by saying the past is fixed is exactly that, is nothing else than that. In our brain, they're full of knowledge of the past and absolutely not corresponding knowing about the future.
Maybe I can ask Mark, that imagery of there being imprints of the past that exist, but no imprints of the future, is a wonderful sort of image, isn't it? It's a beautiful science fiction type.
Well,
literary
weirdly, the first thing that came to mind, apart from that tolling clock, was
the time, the passing of the
was the brilliant. There's a lost play by Nigel Neal called The Road. Nigel Neal, who created Quatermass, one of the great visionary writers of our time, and he wrote this wonderful play in the 60s, which is now lost, sadly. Which is about an 18th century haunting. It's a wood, and the local people believe that Boadicea's soldiers are tramping through it because they can hear footsteps and shouts and cries on a road where there is no road. And there's this. It's a wonderful play. It's a sort of philosophical debate between a sort of 18th century coffee house intellectual like Dr. Johnson and this local squire who does experiments using cat's whiskers and stuff like that. It's a beautiful piece of work. But the brilliant twist right at the end is when we experience the haunting. I mean, there are these flashes of light and sound, and then suddenly we hear what they hear, and it's a siren. And suddenly you realize that the voices are people stuck on a motorway in the future. And it's the epicenter of a nuclear explosion. And it's a backwards haunting. And that's exactly, as soon as you said that, but we don't see memories, we don't see imprints of the future. That's the first thing I thought. And of course, Nigel Neal got there first. But it's a beautiful idea that actually there are ghosts of the future. And we are just, we experience them in our own way.
See, Nigel Neal must have been, I was going to say, just because now we're on let's keep it on Nigel Neal for a while, Mark, and then we'll get back to the physics. But it's
Give Robin something to say.
But no, I just think it, because he was always fascinated, something like the Stone tape as well. And then John Carpenter's film Prince of Darkness, which is influenced by him as well. That idea of time being, and I think again, actually, when we're looking for the practical use of thinking about the block universe, this idea that we are standing in a kind of palimpsest of events upon events upon events, I think does have quite a heartening sense in the kind of fragility of life, that it is, in some ways, you can get a sense of it. In the same way, if you touch a stone and a stone circle, you get there's a moment, a kind of intangible moment, where you feel, somewhere sometimes fed through those ideas of physics, you get a sense of that we are still surrounded by many more times than our own time, what we think of as our own
you
time.
Hippie. You bloody hippie. No, it's true. I mean, that's what you want to feel, isn't it? I I go to Durham Cathedral almost every Christmas Eve. I don't have any religious beliefs at all, but to stand there and think that people have stood exactly there for 1,000 years on that night doing the same thing is something intangibly wonderful about that.
Just to before we move on from this idea of the reason that there's a difference between past and future being, I suppose the analogy would be that the reason there's an up and down in our experience is because of the presence of the Earth.
Yeah.
Right, but in space, not fundamental. If you go out into space between the galaxies, there's no up and down. I suppose in a sense what you're saying is the reason we remember the past and not the future is the presence of this thing in the past, which is the Big Bang. This strange, this perhaps origin to the universe. So that's it's hard to believe, though, I'm sure for most people listening who are following along, I hope, is this idea that the future in your perspective, not Faye, I'll go to Faye in a moment, but in your perspective, the future is there. There is a block universe type description. The past is there. The only difference between them is as you referred to, the second law of thermodynamics. It almost feels like a technicality, but in fact, the whole history of the universe, past, present, and future, is mapped out. I mean, is that what you're saying? Is that you're saying that the only difference between past and future is this special state somewhere in the past?
Yes, I strongly suspect that all the difference between the past and the future, which is enormously vivid and strong for us, is just a consequence and can be accounted for of the fact that there is entropy is growing, if you will. And so there are traces of the past, there are memories of the past, there are no memory of the future, in the same sense, as you're saying, in which the up and down are not fundamental, but we do have a clear account of its origin, is the fact that we sit on a big planet, a rock that attracts us, so down is toward the big planet, and up is the other direction. So it seems to me that we make a mistake if we take a complex experience we have and think that this is fundamental in the world. I mean, I have very vivid experience. I'm afraid of something. But fear is not in fundamental physics. Fear is it's not an illusion, it's true, but it's a complicated thing. So I think that all the difference between the past and the future could be accounted by the second law of thermodynamics.
So Faye, I want to give you the chance to respond to this statement that is I suppose it's the most widely accepted, by the way, isn't it? I guess in theoretical physics that the real difference, the only difference, is there's an asymmetry because there's a very special state, as Carl said, this highly ordered thing in the past that defines what the past is. Apart from that, there is no other difference.
That's right. I think a lot of people have that view. It's not an obvious explanation. You have to do work. It's complex. So the approach that I follow, the difference between the past and the future is a really simple thing. I mean, we remember the past and don't remember the future because the past has happened and the future hasn't happened. This is sort of a really simple explanation. We experience time passing because time does pass. It doesn't. I mean, we leave it to the neurologists to do more science about the way that our brains work. But the hypothesis is that we experience time passing because there is such a thing as a physical passage of time. So there's something there for us to experience. How we experience it and in what way, and whether if we're afraid, whether we have the same experience of time passing as, if you're just sitting there chilling in the garden with your drink, that's for psychologists to figure out. But to
give Robin
really simple.
Well, I was just thinking that
I just want to say we always have this argument at the end of a discussion on Monkey Cage. We usually ask a question. So, is there such a thing as free will? Then,
yeah.
It's a very simple question. But I suppose let me characterise this, and you can tell me that I'm wrong, Faye. In your picture, there would be such a thing as free will, and in Carlo's picture, there would not.
I don't think that the distinction between Carlo's point of view and mine impinges on that question. It all depends on what you mean by free will.
It's got complicated, Robin.
Yeah, that's the thing. So
Call in Melvin Bragg. Call in Melvin Bragg.
if you mean something extra physical, something that's beyond the material, then no. Both Carlo and I would say no. There's no such thing as free will in that sense. Some soul or some. I think. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Carlo. So, but if you think is there a reason for everything that happens? Well, some things that happen, there's a reason. I mean, there's cause. Some things that happen are just random.
Well, let me put it this way. Just to simplify. Just to simplify, in a block universe picture, then my death exists as an event. It is there. It's got coordinates on this space-time manifold or map. Whereas in your picture, it does not exist yet. It doesn't exist. So that's correct. Right?
Carlo has planned your death, Brian. That's the difference. He's worked it out to the minute.
Brian, I'm surprised because usually every time you say something, I agree 100% with what you say. This time I don't. And in fact, I fully agree with Faye. Let me put it this way. You said in Carlo's picture there is no free will. Of course there is free will. I mean, I'm free, you're free. It's just what do I mean by free will is that there is something that decides, is me, is my brain, is things that are happening. I don't have chains. I'm free to decide. So I would not characterize this as there is no free will. I would characterize this as what we mean by free will is just a complicated thing happening in us.
I do worry that in Series 22, Episode 7, we become overly ambitious in hoping that in 28 minutes and 27 seconds we'll come up with satisfying definitions of what time is and the definition of free will.
I once tormented a poor student by we had a discussion about free will. He was trying to convince me that there was some sort of extra physical free will, and I said, no, you're not free. You're not free to pick up that pencil and stab me in the eye. I know for sure that you're not going to do that because your mother raised you right. And he was obviously, I could see he's really conflicted. He's like, could I pick up the pencil and stab you? Just to prove that I have free will.
Game, Faye.
Now, Brian, you've done free will, what is time, and quantum gravity. We're going to have to stop now. I love that temporal language thing. I think is very. There's a lovely one of the TED talks you did, Carlo, where you actually start off by saying, "I have 15 minutes to persuade you that time is an illusion." And I thought, of course, if you manage to do that in 15 minutes, you no longer have 15 minutes to do that. You have as long as you want. It's kind of an intriguing, all those little traps of our language. Mark, I wanted to ask you about I suppose the inspiration sometimes of this science, and when you were writing Doctor Who, and there's a lovely thing. The other day I was doing a virtual pub quiz, and someone said, "Could we do a virtual pub quiz on Doctor Who next week?" And the quizmaster said, "No, we've tried that. They're too pedantic." But I wondered, when you are playing around with notions of time, does kind of reading articles and watching lectures about time, does that inspire narrative sometimes, or do you think, oh God, if I get this slightly wrong, I get loads of letters saying you've misunderstood the idea?
I think you've just got to go with the story, haven't you? As I say, some things like the idea of imprints or memories of the future, that immediately makes your hair stand on anything. That's a beautiful idea, isn't it? But Doctor Who particularly can get into a lot of trouble with that because, of course, it's pseudoscience. It's beautiful nonsense, dimensional transcendentalism, objects fitting inside smaller objects. It's sort of plausible in some sort of distant way. But there have been occasions in Doctor Who's past, famously when a man called Christopher H. Bidmead took over as script editor for Tom Baker's last season. He tried to sort of instill some real science into it. There's a whole story about entropy and all we sort of 14-year-old fanboys got very excited because it was proper and serious and correct. And of course, in the end, it's just as nonsensical as all the rest of it. So I think you've just got to take the rough with the smooth, as they say, and enjoy the stuff. No. Do
you try to be consistent, a la Bill and Ted? So Bill and Ted, Terminator, they're consistent in the sense that you don't go back and change something that's already happened.
No, I think
that's very satisfying. So
you're consistent within one story. I think you're consistent within one story because then someone else comes along and flatly contradicts it 1 week later or several years later. That definitely happens all the time, you know. But I think on a story level, it has to obey its own rules that week. But I mean, Doctor Who begins really with the Doctor saying you can't change history, not one line, and then proceeds to change history for the rest of its run. So there aren't really any rules in that sense.
Have you had a favourite? There's that lovely phrase, a lovely term, I can't remember if it's you first told me, antisappointment. The excitement that some Doctor Who fans get at the fact they feel they're going to be let down by tonight's episode. It's actually more exciting than being, fulfilled by it. Have there been certain ideas where you think, I cannot believe that this many people have written to correct this particular idea of science in a time travel show which zooms around in so many different directions? There was
a recent, a couple of years ago, there was a Peter Capaldi story called Kill the Moon, where the moon turned out to not be a moon, but to actually be an egg, which had been sort of left there for millennia. And people got so cross about it. And you sort of think, well, but why? Because fundamentally the program is about an alien being who can change his appearance countless times, who travels time and space in a dimensionally transcendental police box. But an alien moon egg is absolutely beyond the pale. I remember reading the sort of correspondence on that, just thinking, well, I don't understand it. This bit is fine. This bit is absolutely impossible. But there we are.
I want to throw a complete spanner in. I know we're at the end of the show, right? We've recorded for far too long. So I'm going to ask in 1 minute, because we're talking about Doctor Who, for Faye and Carlo, time travel into the past, wormholes, those sort of things. Almost yes or no. I'll give you 1 minute each to say whether you think that time is ordered in that way, in the sense that obviously you've described, Carlo, at the start of the show, we can go into the future with essentially as fast or as slow as we want relative to someone else. Into the past, yes or no?
So first of all, I have to answer the question, which is my favourite Doctor Who, and that's Tom Baker. Yay. So the question about time travel into the past, if the approach to quantum gravity that I work on, which is called causal set theory, is right, if it's along the right lines, then that's impossible. So it rules it out almost by fiat, but not quite. So yes, that would not be possible. So yeah, my answer is no.
My answer is the following. It's a bit articulated. If by time travel you just mean that in space-time you can follow a future line and come back to yourself, I don't see reasons for this not being possible. So I think general relativity has a solution, so it might be possible. However, if by time travel you mean a person with memories going back to the past and remembering the future, I think this is not possible, because memories demand growing entropy, and you cannot grow along a line all the time. At some point, you when you come back yourself, you have to have the same entropy. So once you have a closed time-like curve, there's a minimum entropy and a maximum entropy, and so the actual experiential direction of time start from somewhere and join at the maximum. So I don't think I can have memories of me old because of entropy, because of thermodynamics.
But you could physically, in some sense, it's wonderful, isn't it, Mark, that would be a kind of a curse almost. You could actually meet yourself, but you'd not.
Time travel is definitely true, because I've got a time machine right here.
For those listening at home, it is the most beautiful model from the George Powell time machine, the one with Rod Taylor. It's a really wonderful thing.
All I have to do is shrink myself. Can we do one on shrinking?
Oh yeah, I'll tell you what, we'll do Fantastic Voyage next week. Well, thank you very much. And by the way, anyone listening, if you have been affected by any of the subjects in today's show, I would not be at all surprised, to be quite honest. We always ask the audience a question as well, and today we asked them, if you could control time, what would you choose to fast forward through? Matt Kick decided, he said, I'd skip waiting for my daughter to tell me that what she wants for breakfast. Then I'd skip her actually eating it. That would save me 90 minutes every morning. That's someone who's enjoying homeschooling, isn't it?
I like this one from someone called Throw the Pie, the 80s. So I'd spend less time in those shell suits.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Ike, and I hope you've enjoyed the bit about the moon and the egg. Carl Stone. Oh, yeah, again, all the time I spent rewinding videos in the 1980s.
This is one for you. People will think this is a plant because it allows Robin to do part of his act. But Dave Parker says all the parts of Brian Blessed films and TV appearances where he's not saying anything. Right. And then listen on an infinite loop until the end of time.
Oh, so it's all the bits where he's just going... Still one of my favourite things was the noises Brian made when Neil deGrasse Tyson was explaining the Large Hadron Collider and Brian Blessed was just at the side, just with his head down, going... It's a beautiful noise, many of it below consciousness. What have I got? Ben, the time between my girlfriend saying she's getting... No, we won't do that. That's a song by Eric Clapton. And Tim...
That's the one I read. That's why I didn't want to do that.
Yeah, no, you're quite right. I got, unfortunately, 3 words in. Yeah. I managed to use my future Block Universe self to see the end of that and managed to... Oh, my God, I think I might have broken the very framework of time, Brian. Thank you so much to Carlo Rovelli and Faye Dowker and Mark Gatiss. And its plasticity, increasing amounts of research offer hope that as we age, we can still be adept at learning intricate new skills and ideas, despite the once presumed idea that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Also, that means there might be some hope of me eventually mastering theoretical physics.
No.
Oh, okay then.
Well, I think I could probably train you to balance a biscuit on your nose.
Ah. Too late. I did 12 minutes with a Jaffa cake the other day. It was only the wasp up my nostril that got me.
No, Jaffa cakes aren't biscuits. They're defined as cakes, right, for tax purposes. I mean, in fact, I refer you to United Biscuits UK Limited, number 2, 1991, BBC 818. The judgment was fascinating on Jaffa cakes, let me tell you. They said, I quote, I come to the conclusion that Jaffa cakes have characteristics of cakes and also characteristics of biscuits or non-cakes. I conclude they have sufficient characteristics of cakes to qualify as cakes within the meaning of Section 5, Group 1, Item 1. If it be relevant, I also determine that Jaffa cakes are not biscuits. I therefore allow the appeal.
Right, so the reason we did that bit was for anyone who's missing In Our Time at the moment. We felt it had that kind of Melvin Bragg here, the Jaffa cake or biscuit. AC Grayling. Anyway, thanks very much for listening. Bye-bye.
Monkey cage without your trousers in the infinite monkey cage. Till now, nice again.
Hello, I'm Dr. Hannah Fry.
And I'm Dr. Adam Rutherford, and we present the curious cases of Rutherford and Fry. That's me and her.
Certainly do. And every week, what we do, we take a listener question, an everyday mystery, if you will, and we try and investigate it.
Using the combined powers of science, books, and occasionally the internet.
Sometimes we just look it up. But anyway, we are back with a new series that's investigating queries like...
Why do our tummies rumble?
Can we make it rain?
And what exactly is the point of wasps?
What is the point of wasps?
It's the end bit, the other end of their faces.
Lols.
I was really pleased with that.
You can hear all the answers to these questions and more by subscribing to The Curious Case of Rutherford and Fry on BBC Sounds.
Or wherever you get your podcasts.